Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian DeMars alongside co-host Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Got some interesting stories on the news that I'm not quite sure what to think about.
Yeah,
so there's that.
Yeah, there were some interesting headlines that made news this week. Obviously, we'll be talking about this past week in the Alliance, as well as touch a little bit base with the NFL Combine coming up this upcoming weekend. But I think we all know where we have to start off with the first news, and it's the news that took place this past weekend. It's that New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft was charged in Jupiter, Florida this past weekend on 2 charges of solicitation of prostitution. There have been reports that there is an arrest warrant expected to go out for him. And what could happen as a result of all this, depending on what happens, is that if everything ends up turning out where he pleads guilty, could possibly face almost up to a year in jail, could face some fines and community service. And obviously, there's going to be some sort of disciplinary action coming from the NFL. So, Ryan, what are your initial thoughts on this?
My initial thoughts on this are that it's a very strange story because the report came out, and that was like the first thing I saw on my phone in the morning was Robert Kraft accused of, I guess, soliciting prostitution. But they say that they have video evidence of him paying for and receiving a sex act, but he categorically denies that anything happened, that he did anything illegal whatsoever. So I find it weird that we can have this difference of him saying that he categorically denies it versus the police saying they have evidence of this, and there was like a sting operation going on for this because it wasn't only a prostitution thing, it was actually a sex slave thing, which adds a new layer to the story. Robert Kraft, obviously a very wealthy man, owns the team. Anything that happens with Robert Kraft doesn't really do anything to impact my life, and there's not even really a hot take to be had here. It's kind of like, if he did it, that's very bad. He'll probably go to jail or pay a hefty fine, and then there will be questions on whether he should still be the owner of the Patriots. But if he didn't do it, then it just becomes, okay, how did they screw this up that bad that they accuse somebody that didn't do anything wrong? So I think we have to wait until there actually is a sentencing to decide what the hot take to be had here is, because right now it's kind of just a factual, well, Patriots owner is accused of soliciting prostitution. There's not much more to go on there at this point in time.
Yeah, looking at this whole scenario, it's interesting that's pointed out that the reports that recently came out was that some of this happened the day of the AFC Championship game. So the reports are he was in Florida. The solicitation happened sometime late morning, and then after that flew to Kansas City and was in attendance for the AFC Championship game. So if that is true, and obviously this ends up getting to a case where he's convicted guilty, this is a really big deal that the NFL has to look into for possible punishment. Now, I'm not sure how drastic the NFL would be in regards to this. Most recently, where there was an issue with an owner was Jim Irsay and the Colts a few years ago when he had, I believe it was a DUI, if I'm correct, where he ended up getting suspended. I believe it was like 6 games and was also fined for the incident. In this case, I might say this could be more drastic, might be a heftier fine. I could see a possible similar suspension. And I think obviously this also depends on what the court rules. If it comes to a case where maybe he takes a plea deal, maybe he ends up only doing community service, maybe he just pays a bigger fine. I'm not sure exactly what this case is. It is expected that the next court case is set, or the court case is set for April. Since it is a misdemeanor, reports are he doesn't necessarily have to be in court. His attorneys will be the ones that handle this. So in this case, it's kind of tough to say what the NFL is going to do in regards to this. This just doesn't make the Patriots look good. We've seen some scandals and incidents happen with the Patriots. Obviously, Spygate, Deflategate. I'm not sure what you could call this one, but
Yeah, let's not come up with a name for this one.
Let's not. There were some tweets I did see from some former NFL players that tried making something out of it. I'm not going to say what those were, but this is something that is pretty drastic, and it's unfortunate that this is happening right now, especially since the NFL scouting combine's coming up. We're getting closer to the draft. We're getting closer to the start of a new league year. It's just a bad timing, unfortunate situation that's going to take a big effect on the NFL. And then the NFL is going to have a big decision to see what they're going to end up doing with Robert Kraft.
I think the two questions that do probably need to be asked and subsequently answered here is, A, will there be a forced sale of the Patriots if he ends up serving jail time, if he ends up being convicted of this? Like, is it bad enough that they're going to have somebody else take over? And then B, does this cast any sort of big negative shadow over the Patriots dynasty? Because that's where we were at after the Super Bowl, was we were talking about the dynasty that was the Patriots. Does this somehow make it less in any way that the owner is involved with this sort of thing?
And I think that could possibly play into a factor. I mean, I'm not sure if it necessarily hurts the Patriots dynasty, like in regards to history, but does tarnish their reputation a little bit. So obviously, they're still going to be one of the greatest dynasties of all time. But the fact that if this ends up being a case where he does serve jail time or has to do a lot of community service, or NFL ends up disciplining him in a pretty big fashion, then obviously the way people look at the Patriots are not going to be the way that people should be looking at them. People should be looking at them as one of the greatest dynasties in the history of the league, one of the best teams, seasons to come. But with this, they're going to be looking at them as, oh, their owner does this stuff, maybe do other things happen on the team that we aren't even talking about.
And there's been other stuff, too, that's been equally bad, if not worse. I remember when the Falcons were in the Super Bowl the first time versus the Broncos in the 90s, Eugene Robinson, I think, got picked up for soliciting a prostitute. And that wasn't really as big of a deal as they're making the Robert Kraft situation. I mean, Ray Lewis was involved with a murder. You know, like, there's been other stuff that's happened where people haven't necessarily been convicted, but it's sort of cast some sort of shadow. I think in the long run, when we look back on this, we're going to almost differentiate Robert Kraft from the Patriots, even though he's owned the team. I think people are going to look at the team and be like, the best set of players in the history of the NFL, perhaps, you know, the best coach, maybe the best quarterback. But I don't think they're going to look at it and say, well, Patriots were never any good. I mean, their owner solicited a prostitute. You know, it just doesn't seem like it's a linear stream of consciousness there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that point. Like I said, we have a couple of months until we actually see what could possibly happen with Robert Kraft in result of this case, and then obviously what the NFL ends up deciding to do. But knowing the NFL, it could take them quite some time to actually come up with a ruling in regards to this. But that's just something we'll just have to wait and see. But let's move on to some different news. So it became official this week that the Pittsburgh Steelers had said they are not going to be giving the franchise tag to Le'Veon Bell. It means not too much of a surprise. He's made it well aware he doesn't want to necessarily be a part of the team. He wants to get a big contract. And it's interesting because it falls in the same timeline as Antonio Brown wanting a trade request and the Steelers saying that they prefer to trade him to an NFC team so that way they don't possibly see him at some point during the season. So this kind of leads us into our Twitter question of the week, which kind of basically talked about, obviously both these guys are going to be on different teams, but no matter who's going to be on a different team first. And looking at the results on Twitter, we actually had a deadlock 50-50 split between the two. Facebook was a little different. People slightly leaned towards Antonio Brown being on the different team first. Ryan, who do you think is going to be on a different team first this offseason?
It's a really tough call because it's dependent largely in part on how quickly the Steelers could get a deal done for Antonio Brown. We kind of know that Le'Veon Bell will probably be going to a lot of different teams, meeting with them, trying to decide where he wants to sign. So I think that timetable is probably going to kind of fit in with most of the other NFL free agents in that sense. Antonio Brown, are they going to wait till after the draft to trade him or before the draft to trade him? Or are they going to wait until closer to when the season actually starts to trade him? So I think that that's going to be greatly dependent. I mean, we could see like tomorrow news coming out of Antonio Brown being traded, but we won't see news on Le'Veon Bell signing probably until somewhere closer to when summertime is here after the draft. So I'm going to say that I think Antonio Brown is going to get moved before Le'Veon Bell signs with the team.
The thing with this is that obviously there can be agreed terms for Antonio Brown anytime right now. Thing is, can't necessarily become official until the new league year begins March 13th. You look at Le'Veon Bell, basically, it's kind of just it's open up to him until that time. The thing with Antonio Brown's deal is obviously Steelers have to find a team that they're able to work with, a team that they're able to get the right assets in return for Antonio Brown. And you look at what that could mean is if they're looking to get a lot of draft assets, then it makes sense to do a trade before the draft. But the issue is if you try doing that, you only have a limited time frame until the draft. So you got to make sure you get the right pieces. With Le'Veon Bell, he's free to do whatever he wants. He can start talking to teams as soon as March 13th comes around. And I think that he's going to end up getting signed with a different team before Antonio Brown gets traded, just because he's going to obviously get paid. He's going to be on a new destination. There are a lot of teams that are going to be willing to offer this guy a lot of money. Some might be willing to give him more guaranteed than total amount. Some might be able to give him more years and spread the money out over time. I think that it makes sense. It makes more sense for Bell to be on a new team first, just because there's a lot more trickiness in regards to Antonio Brown, just because the Steelers need to make sure they find the right team for him, and they also have to make sure they get the right pieces back in return, because they trade him and turns out that they only get like maybe 1 or 2 picks for him. That means, and they do it before the draft, that means they're kind of rushing things. I think they need to take their time with this. They need to make sure that everything's in the right place. And who knows, maybe we could see a blockbuster on draft day and we see him get traded then. It could be a very good possibility, but I just think because of the fact that they need to make sure they get the right pieces, Antonio or Le'Veon Bell that gets on a new team first.
That's fair. And what we have to remember with Antonio Brown, though, is that Antonio Brown, if he doesn't get dealt, is probably not going to play for that team. He's probably just going to hold out, similar to how Le'Veon Bell did. So I think there's a greater incentive for the Steelers to actually make a deal at some point and not let this drag out, because the longer it drags out, the more they're going to have to just deal him for less. So I think there's going to be incentive for them to try to get as much as they can now and not let this go on farther to when all of a sudden teams are going to see that there's a sense of urgency there.
Yeah, it could be the case. I do think that obviously both these guys are going to make some big news over the next couple of months before the draft. It's just a matter of who's going to make that big splash. And who knows, wouldn't even surprise me if both of them got their deals done on the same day. How crazy would that be?
That sounds about right. Probably going to happen. One of them will probably wait till the other one, you know, like if Le'Veon Bell ends up signing with the team, all of a sudden Steelers will be like, oh, well, let's overshadow that by dealing Antonio Brown. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, definitely. But speaking of the draft, the NFL Combine is coming up this weekend, and there were a couple of reports about the Combine this week. First one was about Dwayne Haskins. He did say he will be throwing at the Combine. A lot of people have him rated as the top quarterback in the draft, but others think it might be Oklahoma's Kyler Murray, who's still unsure on what he's going to be doing at the draft Combine this upcoming weekend. There have been a lot of questions on is he going to do his measurements, because a lot of people are questioning his size coming into the NFL. What are your thoughts on both of these players?
Well, the thing about them is Haskins says he's going to throw. Kyler Murray isn't sure whether he's going to throw. I think that we've seen a big-time backlash and kind of chastising of quarterbacks in the past that have decided not to throw at the NFL Combine. And so I think that that's part of why Haskins decided he was going to throw is because he didn't want there to be this looming question of like, why did this guy not participate? Why didn't he throw at the combine? And I think Kyler Murray is going to probably follow suit too and decide to throw, because I don't think that is very common that people, after watching them play their entire collegiate careers, are surprised in a negative way by how they see the ball come out of their hand. And I was listening to some former NFL players I know in the booth talking about the combines and the pro days and stuff. And they said that with these players that are actually next level quarterbacks, like an Aaron Rodgers, like a Patrick Mahomes, you can really see the difference when the ball comes out of their hand, and you can actually hear a different noise when it comes out. If I was one of these players and I actually believed that I was a good quarterback and that was something special, I would definitely want to throw, and I would want to show that off to as many teams as I possibly could.
The tough thing about throwing at the combine is obviously there's a lot of pressure on you with all the scouts there. But also the thing you have to realize is that these guys they're throwing to, they really don't have any chemistry with any of them. Obviously, the reason why some of these top guys wait till their pro days to throw is because they're throwing the guys that they've been throwing to, so they have that chemistry built with them. When you're trying to throw, it's kind of like improv. Like they're forced to throw to these guys who they've never really played before. Yes, they might be very skilled, and yes, their routes are predetermined by the scouts and or officials that are there for the combine. But like I said, they're unfamiliar with them, so they might think this guy's super fast, so they throw a very deep ball and then ends up overthrowing it. They might think a guy's slower, so they underthrow it, and then it looks like the guy has to dive back for it. It's kind of tough to determine how well the quarterbacks are going to be working with the wide receivers or the running backs or the tight end. So that's why we're seeing nowadays some of these quarterbacks waiting to their pro days, because then they get to throw to their guys that they've been familiar with throughout their 3 to 4 years in college. So as much as I think it's a good move for Haskins, just because obviously he's more of a raw quarterback, only having 1 full year starting under his belt. Kyler Murray in a similar situation, but I don't know. I think it's a good move for guys to throw at the combine, because in this case, it shows that they are willing to work with other people, that they don't need chemistry. But some of these top quarterbacks, they feel more confident. They feel like they can show more off at their pro days because they have that chemistry already built with those other wide receivers.
But I think that throwing at the combine is a good testament to the fact that you actually believe in yourself and that you want a challenge. You know, it's kind of like going out and doing something versus sitting at home and doing something. It's like the difference between playing a video game on your couch and going out and actually playing, you know, a pickup game of football. In one of them, there's like no stakes because you know the environment, you know exactly what's going to happen. And one of them, you don't know who's going to show up. You don't know if the player's going to be good, if they're going to be bad. One of them, you're actually putting yourself out there. And the other one, the pro day, you kind of just doing what you always do. So I think it's important for the scouts to see these guys, how they go out on the field, how the ball leaves their hand. I don't think it's necessarily as much about like, you know, how many completions did Kyler Murray make to these receivers that he's never played with before? I think it's more like, was he charismatic? Did it look like he could be a leader? Did he carry himself well? Did the ball come out of his hand with a zip? Could you hear it leaving his hand and spinning? How does the ball look when it leaves his throwing hand? I think that's more what it's about. I think like you get points for going out there and trying this. You get points for participating in this event. I think the players that stick to their pro day, there's sort of this idea that they are not ready for big time and they're just kind of being sheltered.
Yeah, and a thing that they also do at the combine that I think makes a good case and why people should throw at the combine is that some of the snaps that they take, they have to do it from under center, even though there's no center there. They have to be in a position to do that. And a lot of these top quarterbacks, like a Dwayne Haskins, like a Kyler Murray, like a Drew Lock, a lot of these guys played in shotgun offenses. So this is an opportunity to show scouts that, hey, I can take a snap under center and then do a play action to throw a deep ball. I don't have to just be in the shotgun. So like, as much as there are points that I've made that show it's a good idea not to throw at the combine, something like this is something that obviously all the NFL scouts are going to be there. So this is going to be a proving point to show that they can take a snap under center, because not every NFL scout's going to be able to pick them.
Yeah, I just think even though it could be viewed as a risk, it's almost a necessary risk at this point because a team that is picking between Haskins and Kyler Murray, if one of them shows up to the combine and throws and looks good and the other one doesn't, all of a sudden you have a knock against that player. You know, you don't want to go into draft day with teams having any reason to say, yeah, but he didn't do this.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm just kind of going off topic a little bit. Obviously, I'm excited to see these quarterbacks, though, but I'm really interested in seeing on how Kyler Murray measures out. Because if this guy measures under 5'9", how big of a factor is that going to be for first-round teams that are interested?
I mean, I think it could be a difference between him going number 1 overall and him going number 2 or 3 overall. Because I think there's still a bit of a stigma around shorter quarterbacks. We saw Russell Wilson have success. We saw Drew Brees have success. See Baker Mayfield having some success his rookie season, but they are not this short. That is very short for a quarterback.
Yeah, and you look at it, Russell Wilson, 5'11", Doug Flutie, when he had some success, was 5'10". We've never really seen anyone 5'9" or 5'8" have this opportunity to play well in the NFL. So it's a good thing for Kyler Murray that a lot of these more recent younger quarterbacks are playing well. But like I said, this guy's the smallest out of the bunch. So how he measures is going to be a big factor in how this guy or when this guy gets drafted to come the first round.
Yeah, that's very true. And now we are going to switch a little bit from draft talk to talking about some players that got released or potentially will be released. So here's a rundown, Ian. You stop me if you hear anything that sounds interesting to you. So Carolina Panthers released Mike Adams, Captain Munnerlyn. Ravens released Michael Crabtree, probably most well-known for getting trash talked by Richard Sherman when he was on the 49ers. Browns released former number 2 pick Greg Robinson, and the Packers may be looking to let go of Randall Cobb and Clay Matthews going forward.
So, quick note, the Browns are actually re-signing Greg Robinson, not releasing him. There are reports that could possibly have been released because he's had some struggles. He was a former number 2 overall pick, but he was able to stay healthy. He had some issues with some penalties, but they are re-signing him. The terms are still kind of undisclosed, but I think it's a risk that Cleveland can take. They're taking a lot of risks, as we've seen over the last couple of years. So I think that's a good risk for them. Obviously, I think the surprise a little bit was the Michael Crabtree one, just because he only played 1 year. This guy can get you 7 to 10 touchdowns a year. So if you're looking for a guy to help develop Lamar Jackson a little bit, I think Michael Crabtree would have been a guy. So that was a little bit surprising for me.
And he was not terrible in Oakland. Lining up alongside Amari Cooper, he was not bad.
Yeah, and when he was at the Ravens too, obviously there were some up and downs. He didn't show too many flashes at times. John Brown took over a little bit for him, but I mean, he's still a solid NFL receiver, and this guy can still get you 7 touchdowns a season.
Yeah, so that one definitely a little surprising. I think the Randall Cobb, Clay Matthews, it's kind of news that is sad to hear because they were such an important part of the franchise for so long. But I think at the same time, a lot of Packer fans see it as a necessary thing going forward, needing to bring in some new, faster talent on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I agree. Clay Matthews, we've seen him decline in his play over the last couple of years. I think he needs a new destination, so I think the Packers are more than willing to be okay with him test free agency. Randall Cobb is the unfortunate situation because when this guy's had a full healthy season, he's a Pro Bowler. But these last 3-4 years, he's missed multiple games. He's shown flashes, but he hasn't been healthy. So, unfortunately, because of this, it makes sense for the Packers to let him go.
I would like to see Clay Matthews be a lifelong Packer just because he was such a big key player when they made the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl. He was so fast. He was so dynamic, rushing off the edge. And he just kind of has been one of the cornerstones of the franchise, even though his play has diminished and even though he got a ton of roughing the passer penalties last year. You kind of think about Clay Matthews when you think about the Packers, and he's pretty funny in commercials too. So going to be sad when he gets signed to another team.
Yeah, and then just touching a little bit on the Panthers, releasing a couple of their guys. Their defensive secondary struggled a little bit towards the second half of the season, especially when Juan Rivera took over as the defensive play caller. And you look at both those guys were in their 30s. They let go. They're not re-signing Thomas Davis, who's in his 30s as well. Julius Peppers retired. They're looking to rebuild that secondary, make it a little bit younger, which I think is a smart move for a team that was looking like a playoff team last year before their season-ending struggles.
Yep, good point on that. Are you ready to talk some alternative football leagues?
Yes, let's talk about a league we haven't talked about in a while. Let's start off with the XFL. And despite them not even playing a down of football yet, they have been making news recently in regards to their upcoming coaches and GMs for the league starting in 2020. The first coach and GM that was reported was Bob Stoops a couple weeks ago. And this past week, it was reported that the second coach for the Seattle franchise and GM will be ex-NFL quarterback Jim Zorn. What are your initial thoughts on this?
I think that's great. I mean, Jim Zorn, quarterback for the Seahawks way back in the day, was a head coach in the NFL. I think it was with the Redskins for a little bit in the 2000s, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, Redskins in the 2000s. So he has some coaching experience. He is a figure from Seattle. I think that's a good fit for that franchise.
Yeah, and I like what the XFL is doing there. I'm not necessarily saying they're taking an approach that the Alliance did, getting some of these big-name guys, but they're making a big statement with some of these guys. I mean, the fact that they got Bob Stoops to come out of retirement was a huge statement for the franchise or for one of the teams in the league, and now getting Jim Zorn, I think it's a huge move. We saw Matt Hasselbeck comment saying that he thought it was a great move for the Seattle franchise. The league also got Pep Hamilton to be a part of the league, so I think that's a huge statement for the league as well. They're starting to get some big teams or some big names to be in this league. And I think that's something that they're going to need in order to have a chance to be a stable league for the years to come once they do start in 2020.
Yeah, let's talk AAF for a second. And I'm going to go kind of off track here because there was actually some reports that came out the past week about the AAF already having money problems. Did you see a couple of those?
Yeah, I did see that. I want to get into clarifying the issue. So apparently the issue was that the week one checks didn't get to the players when they were supposed to. So apparently they were supposed to come, or apparently the checks were sent out on a Friday. So they were supposed to be deposited, or I believe it was deposited on a Monday. But the Monday they're supposed to be deposited was on President's Day. So not all the 400 some players and coaches, they did not get their pay on time. So those were the reports that made it seem like the lead was going down early, not being budgeted. And then also the reports made it because the Carolina Hurricanes owner invested $250 million into the league. So that was also a reason for them to be rumored to not be in a good financial situation.
So I was kind of thinking about this, and I have a really interesting take on the AAF and the XFL as it relates to the NFL. And the NFL is constantly talking about expanding. Am I right?
Yes.
They're talking about going overseas at some point. They're talking about they're not necessarily talking about getting more teams in, but they're talking about ways of growing the game. And then you have these two leagues, the AAF and then the XFL, that kind of have come up recently and kind of fallen into their lap. They're trying different things with rules. They have franchises in places the NFL doesn't have franchises. Think about how great it would be if the NFL actually sort of like financially backed some of these leagues and sort of like shared possibly in the revenue and sort of like adopted them, sort of like they did with NFL Europe, where NFL Europe was a developmental league that the NFL actually kind of had under their logo. I think that if they did that and they use this as sort of like a petri dish for new ideas and a petri dish for new states to have football in and perhaps go overseas at some point, I think that it would be a lot easier for them to test things out in these leagues if they had some control over what happened. Because there are some new things going on here that I think the NFL could take note of and possibly implement going forward. And it could also serve as a developmental league for players to find kind of a pathway to get into the NFL even after they've left it.
Yeah, and I think that's something the NFL might do at some point with the Alliance, just because the Lions had stated even before the action started, Bill Polian had talked about how they basically want to be a developmental league for the NFL. That's why we're seeing a lot of these guys that were on practice squads playing the Alliance, because it gives them opportunity of actual game playing time. It's not just sitting in practice, being on a scout team or anything like that. They're getting game time that actually is going to matter. And some of these guys are going to be possibly going to training camp with NFL teams, could have a shot to make teams in the NFL. I mean, look at Josh Johnson. This guy was supposed to be the quarterback for the San Diego Fleet, and what happened before the season starts? He ends up getting a call to Washington and ends up being their quarterback for the rest of the season because of injuries. So some of these guys in the AAF are going to get opportunities, and some of them have really shined so far, and they're going to get decent looks at the NFL this upcoming season. So the NFL is going to look at this, and they're going to determine, I'd say, in the next couple of years, whether they are going to financially help support the AAF. And obviously the AAF's in a good position right now because a lot of the guys behind the scenes have had NFL experiences. Guys like Bill Polian, Hines Ward, those guys are going to continue talking with the NFL, and would not surprise me within the next 2 to 3 years that the NFL is backing the AAF and giving them money to help keep that league going.
Yeah, I think that it could be a really good thing for everybody, and they don't really directly compete with the NFL because they're not during the same season anyway. So I don't think that there's really a malicious relationship between the two. Like, it's not like the AAF is actually planning on usurping the NFL.
Yeah, and the thing is, when Vince McMahon started the XFL originally, his goal was to compete with the NFL. He wanted to overtake the NFL. And what Vince McMahon's, I believe, trying to do with this new league is, I think he obviously still wants to compete with the NFL, but by having it at a different time of the year, he's going to have that opportunity to show that this league can be very competitive as well and could possibly be not better than the developmental league. So I think his main goal right now is obviously he's got to show that his league is going to be better than the developmental league of what the AF is intending to be. And then if that is the case for him, it's going to be a very hard possibility for him to take over the NFL. Obviously, the NFL is one of the most popular sports in the world. But Vince McMahon's a good guy, or he's an interesting guy. He's going to be able to find some sort of way, I think, to find some success this time around in the XFL.
It will be interesting because I've watched that documentary on how the XFL failed the first time, and you hope that he learned from that experience. I don't want to have to see a second documentary about the XFL take two not.
Yeah, who knows? That could be something that could be in the works in the next 3 years, but we'll find out in 2020 when that league does start. But let's continue on talking about the Alliance. So week 3 is in the books now. We're down to 2 undefeated teams with the Birmingham Iron and the Orlando Apollo staying undefeated, which means the Arizona Hotshots lost for the first time, but they also did lose a starting quarterback, John Wolford, in that game. So that was a reason why they started falling late in that game. We saw Christian Hackenberg struggle yet again, and as a result was benched in the second half of their game against the Apollos. Trent Richardson continued to dominate it in the league with 3 rushing touchdowns this past week. And then we saw San Diego Fleet's running back Jaquan Gardner had the longest run in Alliance history with an 83-yard touchdown run in their win over the Commanders, which also brings him into the league lead in rushing yards. So, Brian, what was your biggest take from week 3 this past week?
My biggest take is that out of the conferences they have, the Western Conference is going to be much more heavily contested than is the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference has, as of right now, what appears to be the two best teams in the Orlando Apollos and the Birmingham Iron, but they also have what appears to be the two worst teams in the Memphis Express and the Atlanta Legends. So that conference has two teams that are 3-0 and two teams that are 0-3. You go to the Western Conference, the Fleet and the Hot Shots are 2-1. The Commanders and the Salt Lake Stallions are 1-2. So I think the Western Conference is still up for grabs. I picked the Hot Shots to still come out of that one, but the Fleet, after looking horrible week one, looked a lot better since then, and now look like they're actually a potential contender.
Yeah, looking at it, San Diego, with that quarterback change, making Philip Nelson their starting quarterback was definitely a smart move as they won their past two games. Looking at this, I think obviously the big story has to be about Christian Hackenberg. The fact that this guy was given an opportunity, a lot of people were hoping that this was going to be the start to rejuvenate Christian Hackenberg. And what has he shown? He hasn't really shown that ability to throw the ball downfield. He did finally start letting the ball out a little bit more this past week. However, it resulted in a couple turnovers. They weren't able to get the ball moving on offense. And as a result, he was benched in favor of who was third-string quarterback but was back up this past week, Zach Mettenberger, former LSU quarterback, and then most recently with the Tennessee Titans of the NFL. Came and got a couple of touchdowns in the second half, sparked that team, and unfortunately they were not able to overcome that early deficit against the Apollos. But Zach Mettenberger is proven that he is now capable of being a starting quarterback, as he has been given the opportunity and will be starting this upcoming week for the Memphis Express. So it'll be interesting to see how Mike Singletary and that team is able to bounce back. It's just an unfortunate situation for Hackenberg, because I do believe he was just put in an unfortunate situation coming out from Penn State. Didn't really get to show too much. He was told that his mechanics were really off and that been working with the coach and was showing very good improvements, but unfortunately just hasn't been able to show it so far in the Alliance.
It's kind of insane that this guy was drafted in the NFL and has just been so extremely terrible, you know?
Yeah. And
like, it's not often that you see somebody that was talented enough to be taken highly all of a sudden just be so far away from living up to any of the hype.
Yeah, and he was a second-round quarterback, so I feel like in a lot of these cases, they're not as talked about as much as like first-round quarterbacks that struggle, but this is just a really unfortunate situation because Hackenberg never really got an opportunity. That's because when he's played in preseason games, there's just been something that hasn't looked right, and that's why he never got an opportunity. You can definitely tell it's improved with how he's played, but he just hasn't been able to show it on the field, and unfortunately might not be able to show it anymore unless something were to happen. But
yeah, there's just not be anywhere else for him to go at this point.
Yeah, like I said, he's just going to have to continue to develop in the league. Who knows, could still be there for quite some time. Obviously, it's first year, but he's going to be there, I think, for a while until he's able to show some improvement. But let's talk about Week 4 now. So let's look into our games this week. So we got the 0-3 Memphis Express, as we just talked about. They host the San Diego Fleet, winners of 2 in a row. The Salt Lake Stallions host the undefeated Orlando Apollos. The games on Sunday, we got the Birmingham Iron hosting the Commanders of San Antonio. And then the last game on Sunday, we have the Hot Shots of Arizona hosting the Atlanta Legends, still looking for their first win. So, Ryan, who do you have in your Week 4 picks?
All right, going with San Diego over Memphis, although Memphis's uniforms are cool. I will give them that. Well, it'll be interesting to see how Zach Mettenberger does in that game. I have the Orlando Apollos over Salt Lake. I have Birmingham over San Antonio, and I have the Hot Shots over the winless Atlanta Legends. Also worth noting, 2 of these games are on NFL Network, so that's interesting as it pertains to what we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and if for some reason you don't have NFL Network or CBS Sports or Bleacher Report Live, we did mention on Twitter and Facebook this week that you can actually catch all these games on either the Alliance of American Football website or on their app as well. So if you do want to check these games out, feel free to go on one of those, and then you should be able to watch the games each week. But looking at my picks, I'm going to say Zach Menberger gives Memphis their first win over the Express this week. I like Salt Lake ending up at home against the Apollos, ending the Apollos' undefeated streak. I like Birmingham at home, and then I like Arizona at home. So I'm going with all the home teams this week.
The Apollos logo is so cool, though. How can you bet against it?
I don't know. They struggled a little bit last week. They didn't necessarily get off to a great start, and they were expected to win that game pretty heavily. So it's kind of tough to see. Obviously, they played well the first couple of weeks, but we started to see some of the downsides for them this past week.
I think they're going to get it together. I'm a firm Apollo supporter because their logo is awesome.
Yeah, they do have a pretty solid logo. I will go with you there. But now let's go to our fantasy picks. So, Ryan, you went into the lead. You had the lead last week. I do want to make note that I had said you had 13 points the first week with John Wolford. You actually had 14. I forgot to count a 2-point conversion that you had.
How dare you?
So that helped you in the first week. Unfortunately, week 2 or our second week of fantasy football didn't help you out too well. Zach Stacy only had a total of 3 points. He only had 29 rushing yards, and he had, it was in the double figures in passing, but it wasn't quite enough. But picking Trent Richardson worked out for me as I was able to get a whopping 23 points this week from him with this 3-touchdown effort. As a result, I now lead this week the season standings by a score of 30-17. So, Ryan, since you did lose this past week, we are going with wide receivers this week. So who's the one wide receiver that you're going to pick this week?
So I'm going to stick with the Orlando Apollos, and I'm going to go with Charles Johnson, who is currently the leading receiver in the AAF with 305 yards over the first 3 games. I think he's going to put up hopefully some big stats this week, and I'm looking to get back into it after Zach Stacy let me down in a big way, and Trent Richardson ruined everything for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a good solid pick. He's averaging over 100 yards a game, so very good pick right there. I'm going to go with Rashad Ross of the Arizona Hotshots. I was able to see him play a lot this past week in their loss to the Stallions, and this guy's an explosive guy. And unfortunately, I'm not sure how much of a factor is he still going to be the number 1 guy if John Wolford is the missed time. As I said, he had left this past week with an injury. So it'll be interesting to see if Trevor Knight does start, how he works. But if Wolford's there, I expect Ross to have a solid game. And they are going against the 0-3 Atlanta Legends. So I do expect that Arizona is going to be able to pass the ball often and that they're going to be able to find the deep ball with Ross.
All right, we'll see how they do if their starting quarterback does not play. So we are at the ending point of our show-ish. So it's time to talk about fantasy football. And so, Ian, the question this week is which rookie is going to be the best player out of the rookie class to use for fantasy football this year?
I was thinking this over. It's kind of tough to tell which rookie because obviously I think you have to go with offense here because if we're talking about standard leagues, that makes the most sense.
Unless one of them really picks up a defense and that defense suddenly catches fire.
Yeah. The thing is, there are a lot of good offensive playmakers. Obviously, there are some good quarterbacks, as we talked about with Haskins and Kyler Murray, 2 of the most likely top 2 quarterbacks. There are also some good wide receivers that are coming out. But if I'm looking for a guy that I think could be the biggest playmaker, I'm going to go with DJ Metcalf from Ole Miss. This guy was a huge contributor to this team this past season. There were reports that he could have been a first-round pick last season. He has very good potential. I think this guy could be a solid playmaker wherever you put him on a team. There are reports he could be a late first-round pick or a second-round pick. I think whatever team does pick him up is going to get a solid contributor. Could see him as a solid 3 receiver somewhere this year, but I think this guy's going to be a surprise to a lot of people.
Okay, that's a solid pick. He was definitely on my radar. I am going running back, and in the latest CBS Sports mock draft, they have Josh Jacobs going to the Eagles at 25, running back from Alabama. Looking at which players seem to make the biggest splash as rookies in the NFL lately, the running back position has definitely been one of the most notable. So we've had Kareem Hunt, who was huge his rookie season. We had Ezekiel Elliott, who was huge his rookie season, and Saquon Barkley, who was huge his rookie season. So Josh Jacobs is pretty much the top-rated running back right now going into the draft on a lot of people's boards. And I think wherever he goes, he's going to have a good shot at getting a lot of carries right away. And that's the biggest difference between rookie running backs versus receivers and also quarterbacks is with a running back, even if they're not the go-to guy, they'll still probably get into the rotation at some point. And if they do well, they'll keep getting carries. With quarterbacks, they're either the guy or they're not the guy. With running back or wide receiver players that can play in front of them just because of how many wide receivers can be on a team. So it seems like running backs have been really solid out of the draft lately. I think that's going to continue this year with Jacobs.
Yeah, it's definitely a good solid pick. He's been rising on a lot of people's draft boards. There's an article recently on ESPN that talked about which rookie running back could maybe be a next Le'Veon Bell type back, and there are reports that that Jacobs guy could be the next possible Le'Veon Bell.
Because I don't know if I want him anymore then, because Le'Veon Bell really disappointed me this year.
Yep, you weren't the only one. He disappointed a lot of people. But I don't think Jacobs has I'm not sure exactly how we describe it, but skill-wise, I think could be a similarity. But off the field-wise, I think it'll be just fine.
The description of him says he runs angry, a smooth pass catcher. So if you want words to describe him, that would be it. But we are to the end of our show. So, Ian, is there anything you want to say to everybody out there listening before we let them get going?
Yeah, again, just thanking everyone for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays. We are the official football podcast of Bruce Sports. Make sure to listen to us each week, either live on YouTube or when we post on iTunes, Google Play, and Spreaker. Make sure to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter. If you do search us on Twitter, make sure to use the handle at TDWN2's podcast. Keep an eye out for our questions of the week that will be posted on both of those social media platforms. And also just make sure to keep looking at us with all the up-to-date NFL, AAF, or college football news, and the XFL news once they start getting rolling next year. So again, thank you everyone for listening this week. We look forward to talking to you about the NFL Combine and much more in the AAF next week.
All right. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Continue to support us. Have a great rest of your week.